All right, Rowdy. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great, man. How are you?
Wonderful, man. Hanging in there.
Ready to get into this podcast, man. We're going to talk some cubes, and I love some QBs.
Yeah, it was kind of hard to make 10. Just to pick 10, and then with honorable mentions, it's really the entire nation. There's a lot of really good quarterbacks out there.
Yeah, the past few years, the quarterback position, it's been pretty nice, especially with the talent we've seen go into the league. And this year is no different. I mean, some of our honorable mentions, are guys that could easily be high round picks, but with in terms of production and what these guys have laid out for them in the future is possibly why they're here in the honorable mention part.
Yeah, speaking of the honorable mentions, before we get into the top 10, it's a long list. Before I ask you who stands out on this, I'd like to address, Bryce Young and C.J. Stroud. They are at the bottom of the honorable mentions list. Simple reason they haven't played. They have a very high
Mm-hmm.
ceiling, though. They will be one of those two will be top 10 quarterbacks this season. I don't doubt it, but it would just be disrespectful to put them over these other guys who've put in the work over the last couple of years.
Yeah, we've had conversations, about the Bryce Young hype. I think if you were to put a top 10 quarterbacks based off hype, Bryce Young is there. But if you were to but this isn't based off of hype. This is projecting our top 10 cubes. We've seen guys. You said it best. It's you can't put a guy who hasn't played over guys who have played. And there will be a guy on here that we'll address later on in this list that people will probably think, well, why is he here? And we'll have an explanation for that.
Yeah, unquestionably, and back to my question, who's one guy really stands out on here that could really make a strong case to be in the top 10?
I would say, for me, it's Desmond Ritter. Him not being in it and Dylan Gabriel are two guys that were really tough not putting in the top 10, and with a slight edge to Desmond Ritter, because I think what he did at Cincinnati last year was just prolific, and I'm really looking forward to see what he can do this year.
Yeah, over the last 3 years, Ritter has been a great dual threat passer and runner for the Bearcats, and he gets a lot back around him on both sides of the ball. This is going to be the year to shine for Ritter. A lot of people are looking at him as a potential underdog for the Heisman, and I buy it completely because if this team wins a lot of games, then he'll certainly be up there.
I think that's a fair argument. He's got the talent. It's just a matter of, Cincinnati, how seriously will they take a group of five team, especially with having a Heisman candidate.
Agreed, and like you said, Dylan Gabriel from UCF, Gus Malzahn comes in. He gets a great quarterback who's shined over the last couple of years. He led the FBS last year and throws over 40-plus yards with 21. That was more than Mac Jones by a handful. That's just an impressive number, 21 throws of over 40 yards, completions.
Yeah. I mean, he's got a cannon. I'm looking forward to see how he goes this year.
Another guy that, we haven't really seen a lot of him. Unfortunately, Arizona State only had played 4 games last year. Jayden Daniels, you saw what he did at the end of his freshman season. Elite talent. What's your kind of projection for Daniels and the, Sun Devils offense, rather?
I think Jane Daniels has the weapons. I think Arizona State has actually recruited really well over the past few years, with Herm Edwards being there. And I think Jaden Daniels last year just had to deal with consistency issues and COVID. It affected everyone, and it could go down to the quarterback, And so I think Jaden Daniels will see a lot of a better year out of him this year. But I think with his lackluster year last year, it really hurt his draft stock, because this year he will be draft eligible and people will look at that year. And so this year he needs to have a bounce back year.
Yeah, it wasn't exactly lackluster as it was. He wasn't on the field whatsoever.
Yeah.
He's really fallen off the radar, which is unfortunate considering he was projected to have a big takeoff season last year. I think we're still going to see that this year. Arizona State, they'll be battling for the Pac-12. I think them and Utah, these guys are either going to be both undefeated or have at least one loss each or something in that area. Arizona State goes to Salt Lake City. The last time Jane Daniels was there, 4 of 18, 25 yards, a pick. He had 8 rushing yards on 16 carries. His worst career game. And it's not going to get any easier this year going to Salt Lake City. So I'm definitely excited to see what he can do in his return to Utah.
Yeah, no doubt. You said it earlier. The team Utah has returns 4th in production, so the team is Jane Daniels is going to see a relatively same team that he saw last year, and this year he should definitely have that game circled on the calendar.
Yeah, most certainly. And, I'd like to go ahead and jump into our list. At number 10, we have Carson Strong from Nevada. A lot of people are going to be shocked by this, but this guy, he was just phenomenal last year. 70% completion rate, 2,800 yards, 27 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. Those 4 interceptions weren't any either. Two of them were versus Fresno State, both in the red zone on underthrows, but then he had one versus San Diego State late in the fourth quarter on miscommunication. So, he did a great job protecting the ball. He threw it away when it was not there. I'm really impressed with what I saw by Carson Strong, and he gets back a good, repertoire of playmakers. I really think he's going to show people why he deserves to be in the top 10 this year.
Yeah, Carson Strong was, one of those guys that, it was kind of hard to decide, between him and Ritter, because that's who it really came down to, him, Ritter, or Gabriel. So you had a good amount of group of 5 cubes that you could put there. But I felt like Carson Strong had the advantage. I think that this team, they do pretty well with quarterbacks, and I think that Carson Strong, he's just going to be the next guy in line. I don't know if he will be a highly drafted quarterback, but you look at the production he's had on the college football gridiron, he'll be great.
Yeah, 39 pass attempts per game, and he still completed 70%. Granted, these guys throw a lot of screens, but that's not the only thing that stood out. He throws the ball downfield with confidence. His receivers also dropped a lot of balls. Strong himself was accurate. The ball placement was very good. He throws in a very impressive fade route. If you get the chance to watch Nevada this year, you're going to see that in the red zone. You're going to be like, wow, what a throw. Sometimes he tends to underthrow some balls deep. He's a quick decision maker, though. And again, he throws it away when it's not there. He keeps it out of harm's way. He doesn't force it, and that's what really stands out if you're an NFL scout.
Mm-hmm.
Nevada does get their top receiver back in Romeo Doubs. He's a premier playmaker, and then tight end Cole Turner. He's 6'6", so he's got all the weapons to be great this year.
Yeah, I think Nevada, like I said, projection-wise, I think they'll be great, and that's why it was hard to, not put Carson Strong inside the top 10, because I think Nevada is going to be fine offensively this upcoming year, and Carson Strong is going to take the next step in his development, and we're going to see a fun Nevada offense this year.
Yeah, really excited to see what that bunch can do. Moving to number 9, Michael Penix. He's coming back from, another torn right ACL. I think that you're not sure if that's going to be questionable or not in terms of what he's going to be able to do with his movement. And we're not just overreacting to that 491-yard, 5-touchdown game against Ohio State. We just flamed that secondary. This guy is legit talent that kind of projects well to the next level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the injury really it sucks, because Michael Penix was really on pace to be a really good starter for the Indiana Hoosiers last year. I mean, just better than he was. And to see, I think he's lower on this list because of the ACL injury, because ACLs are hard to come back from, especially if you are a dual threat quarterback. And Penix has that ability. And I would like to imagine it doesn't affect his game, but of course, you got to take it into account that it is a possibility. But I think that the Hoosiers wide receiving core definitely gives Penix a little bit more to work with, in terms of being a pocket passer.
Yeah, they get Ty Freifogel back and Miles Marshall, Peyton Hendershot, and they added a pair of transfers from Power 5 conferences. The weapons, he has a loaded arsenal.
Mm-hmm.
For a lefty, Penix, he has some great zip on the ball. Like his arm talent is extremely impressive, especially when he rolls out. He can make plays out of the pocket. So if people get a chance to check out his highlights of the film, don't watch more than just Ohio State, because trust me, he does way more throughout his entire body of work is really impressive, not just that one game. His accuracy was a little spotty. Asked him to throw a lot more, though. His completion rate dipped from 2019 from 68% to 56%. 37 pass attempts per game. He had to carry the offense. They didn't run the ball very well whatsoever, and he averaged 274 yards per game. I would like to see him improve on his deep ball, and of course, the spotty accuracy, but he really doesn't appear phased under pressure. He makes good throws, and I think if he can stay healthy over the course of an entire year, people are going to really see his talent speak for itself.
Yeah, him and Ty Freifogel connection is a match made in heaven, and I'm really looking forward to see how that matchup turns out, because obviously, you got Ohio State's great combination of receivers, but you cannot count out Indiana's wide receiving core.
Yeah, Freifogel, 642 yards in the 5 games with Penix. After that, I believe he had not even 100 yards over the next 3 games. After he lost Penix, his production just dipped significantly. But those guys were on par all year long.
Oh, yeah.
Moving to number 8, Malik Willis. Now, I don't want people, assume that Willis is just one of those breakout guys in the group of 5, because, he is a former highly recruited 4-star athlete from Auburn. And he finally got the chance to start this year for Liberty. and Hugh Freeze, and man, boy, did he shine.
Yeah, he had a really good year, with 20 touchdowns to 6 interceptions, and then you look just under 1,000 rushing yards, and you can't 14 touchdowns. The guy's an athlete, and it makes you wonder because we see a lot of guys transfer from Auburn or come to Auburn, and Auburn likes their dual threat quarterbacks, but Malik Willis, he just never really got his chance there, and goes to Liberty, and he, like you said, he shines.
Yeah, he's a very fluid, shifty runner. His vision and burst just stands out. And along with the impressive arm talent, this is why people are, projecting him to possibly go number 1 next year. He really is a true talent, regardless of who he plays for. People be like, "Oh, Liberty, this and that," but they should not be taken lightly. This rushing attack, Willis was the engine behind it, but they were 9th in rushing offense, 252 yards per game. It was more than just Willis, but he was the main conductor behind that train.
Yeah, Liberty, they're a team to watch next year, and it's obviously led by Malik, and Hugh Freeze has really helped Malik and, I think shape his game, because at Auburn, we saw a little bit of him and he looked mediocre at best. And now he obviously, the hype is there for him to be number 1. But the reason why he's at number 8 for us is because he still has a lot to prove. You can't go off of one great year, as much as we'd love to, he needs to, back it up and show that he's more than, just a one good year.
Yeah, because he held the ball too long. Occasionally, his negative plays. I guess there's something Lamar Jackson did when he was in college. trying to use his legs to his advantage. It'd be a disadvantage at times.
Right.
But the arm talent is there. The consistency on deep balls that really needs to be improved. But he pushes the ball downfield with authority. You can't really ask for much more. And his ball placement. Some of the film I was watching, it was just spot on ball placement. So again, we expect high things from Willis. I think there's a lot of things he's going to work on that's very coachable. He prefers a scramble instead of checking it down. Stuff like that he's really going to work on. I think he's going to seriously be a first-round pick next year.
Yeah, he's, like we said, he's got the potential, and that's the thing with Malik is his faults were never on his, lack of talent. The talent is there. It's just, he needs to get coached up better, and I think Hugh Freeze has been the great guy for that.
Yeah, his first year starting, so that stuff, it's going to improve. Can't wait to see what happens. Moving to number 7, DJ Ungole from Clemson. We were talking to Eric McLean about him, and he said, offensive coordinator Tony Elliott, he doesn't think he's ever seen a guy with as much arm talent as this guy. He had Trevor Lawrence just a couple, for the last 3 years.
Yeah, and then not to mention he's, got another guy that I'm sure Clemson would love to rival DJ Uiagalelei in a viral clip surfacing of, Arch Manning, but DJ, he is the guy that I mentioned earlier in the podcast that people would question why he's here if he hasn't played that much. But the thing is, he's got a start under his belt. The guys, CJ and Bryce, they never started a game, but DJ has. We've seen what he can do. We saw him as a true freshman, as a starter at Notre Dame, and he shined.
Yeah, that's all I really needed to see was those 2 games of film. I figured they were going to do just fine with him in Trevor's absence, but he, even shocked my expectations. In South Bend, they were down 23-10 late in the second quarter in that game. He stayed composed, led them back. He also had a great drive late in the fourth quarter that took the lead. And, of course, he had a brilliant strike on the first play of overtime that set him up for a touchdown. Ungole, this guy has the poise, he has the skills, the talent. He's going to have a massive season and a massive career, I think, for Clemson.
Yeah, and one of the things that Eric also pointed out is, note the rushing touchdown in South Bend. His rushing game might be limited this year because of the injury. The quarterbacks at Clemson right now, their depth it's spotty at best right now with Tyson. I can't pronounce his last name. He went down with a meniscus or Achilles or an ACL injury, and that really hurts the depth. So DJ's going to have to look to protect himself, but that'll be no issue behind a really stellar Clemson offensive line.
Yeah, his size is kind of, comparable to Cardale Jones, so I think you'll see him on 4th and shorts and stuff, but they're certainly going to want to moderate him when it comes to running the football. Just to touch on his arm talent one more time. He throws over the middle with confidence. He puts on display his big arm. He loves to make downfield throws, and he does it with authority as well. Only thing I would like to see him improve on that I saw that was really a negative, you learn to take the zip off the ball sometimes. When you're young, you haven't played a lot. That's going just comes with repetition, really. So, he tends to be off target on his throws, but, he's going to be elite. I don't really have any concerns. And with a full, 12 to 15 game season, he's certainly going to make massive improvements.
Yeah, I agree.
Moving to number 6, JT Daniels. He transferred over from USC to Georgia last year, and he didn't get to start till the final 4 games. But man, this offense was just completely different. They finally had balance, and these guys are looking to be scary good this season if they're fully healthy at receiver.
Yeah, Dwan Mathis and Stetson Bennett looked more or less as game managers for Georgia, but when JT Daniels stepped in, you immediately saw an entirely different offense. We saw George Pickens take off. We saw Jermaine Burton, a true freshman receiver, take off, and he just really shined in this offense, like a lot of people anticipated him to do.
Yeah, George Pickens, the night when Daniels got his first start against Mississippi State, he posted on Instagram a picture of him just smiling. That's all it was, no caption, just him smiling. And you're like, well, that's because he's extremely happy with who he has under center.
Mm-hmm.
Daniels, he does a good job of finding his hot when things break down, but other than that, he's very accurate over the middle of the field, intermediate range. He's very fluid in the pocket. Throwing to the boundary is one of his best throws. Curls, outs, comebacks. He doesn't miss on those. They're going to run those a lot, especially when they're playing some tough secondaries in the SEC and in Week 1 against Clemson. Also, his football IQ is A+. This guy's a hard worker. I think he just naturally reads the defense, and I think that's going to be a big part of his game. And that's something Georgia hasn't had at quarterback under Kirby Smart, really.
Yeah, you can look at Jake Fromm, and Jake Fromm looked as if he was going to be the future at Georgia, but as time went on, he just showed to be a game managing quarterback there. And now I think JT is possibly, I wouldn't say the best quarterback Kirby Smart's ever had in his locker room, as we've seen a guy that went to the Bears in this most recent draft who never beat out Jake Fromm. But I think JT is exactly what Kirby Smart needs, and it's going to provide the consistency at a higher level, because Fromm, you look back on him, he was consistent slightly, he could get it done, but that was about it. But JT, he's shown that he can be much more than past quarterbacks that Georgia's had.
Daniels, I think he really just fits what Todd Monken's trying to do, the offensive coordinator. It's from his time in the NFL, and I think he really just fits the mold of what they want from their quarterbacks, because they really just missed a quarterback. They need more than just a little bit of a game manager, because when the run game breaks down, the balance just throws everything out of whack, and that's been their biggest Achilles heel. They've never needed an elite quarterback play at Georgia, but that's what they're going to get this season with Daniels.
I think, one thing you got to talk about with Georgia is Jermaine Burton and George Pickens. I believe there's a possibility that they could come back later in the year. I believe I've heard that somewhere, maybe even from you, Dalton. I could be wrong. But early on in this season, he will not have 2 of the top playmakers in the SEC, or one of potentially, a rising playmaker in Jermaine Burton, and a top guy in next year's draft in George Pickens.
Yeah, it's possible Pickens could play Week 1. He's been recovering very well from his ACL. You just have to wait and see. Time to tell with that. But yeah, if these guys are fully healthy, they have the weapons to shine with their passing attack. Daniels averaged over 300 yards a game in the 4 games, so very excited to see what these guys can do. Moving to number 5, another SEC guy, Matt Corral. Corral really shined last year under Lane Kiffin's system. Came in, beat out John Riles Plumlee, an absolute speedster. And man, this offense, as a whole, was just too tough to contain. Alabama had no answers for them when they played early in the season. Nobody else really did either throughout the course of 2020.
Yeah, that Lane Kiffin offense with Matt Corral really looked nasty in terms of numbers put up, the yards, 300 over 3,330. The guy was stellar. And I know that whenever we were talking about the placement for Matt Corral, because I think Matt Corral's potential is through the roof. One thing you really like to point out was his 11 of his 14 interceptions of the season came across 2 games.
Yeah, it was kind of weird. 6 on October 17th against Arkansas, 2 the next week, and then 5 versus LSU. So, those came really across 3 games. His gunslinger mentality really got him in trouble. It was weird to see him have 6 early in the year and then 5, in second to last game of the year. So, they're asking a lot from him, though, but, he's got to cut down on the turnovers, because the decision-making just gets away from him at times. I think, I don't think overconfident is a correct word, but the gunslinger mentality sometimes will just let him just free fire, because he did that against Arkansas. He was just firing in the coverage for no reason whatsoever, staring down his receivers and whatnot. That's a big problem for where his interceptions came from. I think, you can coach that out of him, I think, with some real hard work. That will go away from his game. But, other than that, pinpoint accuracy, he's on mark. But when he's not, he's way off target, so his consistency certainly needs to improve in all aspects of his game.
Yeah, I think, he's most of his issues, like we've said, we kind of say the same thing about Malik Willis. Most of his issues are coachable. And, he doesn't have the turnover, or he does have the turnover issues. Willis doesn't. I think that's definitely something that can be adjusted. Lane Kiffin, he's known as being, an offensive guru, quarterback whisperer. And I think his relationship with Matt Corral is just going to be more evidence to show that.
Yeah, most certainly. The great arm, he can make throws at any level. So even though the Rebels lose Elijah Moore and Kenny Yeboah, I think his arm and his talent is really going to speak for itself this year. I think the production is not going to disappear. I think it's actually going to go up. So, big losses. Ole Miss might not have a winning record, but this guy's certainly going to shine and be one of the focal points of the entire conference, really.
I agree.
Moving to number 4, Keeon Slovis from USC. Impressive first 2 seasons, in 2019, 72% completion rate led FBS. He took the starting job from JT Daniels after he came in, 3,500 yards, 30 touchdowns. He was phenomenal. Last year, and just, he had 7 interceptions, and I believe it was 6 less games. He had 2 less INTs and 6 less games. So, turnovers were a bit of a problem for him last year, but he really fits what the Trojans are trying to do for Graham Harrell's offense, and I think he's going to have a big bounce-back season.
Yeah, I think Keon's a guy that, draft scouts are going to really be having their eye on this year because he's a pro-style quarterback. He fits the bill of, the pro-style quarterback. So I think that scouts are really going to have their eye on him. And one thing that he'll have to shore up is, of course, his turnovers, be a little bit more accurate. But I think that his talent is through the roof. And I think that, USC is going to have a really solid year next year under Clay Helton.
Yeah, just to speak, you said he needs to be a little bit more accurate. I think consistency is the better word because he's accurate. Okay, yeah. The consistency just
right.
Last year, I remember watching the game against Arizona, and Joel Klatt was like, something's wrong with Keeon Slovis because, he just wasn't putting a lot of zip on the ball. And, I never heard about an injury that happened last year or anything, so I'm not sure what was going on. But he certainly was a bit of a different quarterback compared to how he was in the season. But, altogether, he throws with touch, accuracy, the precision is all there. People have him projected to be a top 5 pick in next year's draft. And you see it when you turn on the field. He's not just a product of the offense. He throws good footballs. He does it with precision. The moderate arm strength is a bit of a concern. But this guy, his poise, his confidence, it is all there. He had, 3 game-winning drives. He threw 3 touchdowns in the last minute of 3 different games. So, he's got the poise.
He's got the clutch factor.
Yeah. That's one part of his game that really stands out. He works through his reads. He understands the offense, the concepts. He's got A+ football IQ, kind of like his old teammate JT Daniels. And he's also worked with Tom House this offseason. So I think a lot of, his mechanics get off base and whatnot at times. So I think a lot of the things that he struggles with, he's going to improve. And I think, despite losing a handful of guys, he's going to have a big season.
Yeah, I mean, say what you want about what USC is, put on the field, but the quarterbacks that they've had over the past, 5 or so years, from JT Daniels at one point to Keeon Slovis and Sam Darnold at one point, these guys, they can make a quarterback and put him into the league. And, that's just been a trend that USC's prided themselves on for really the past few decades.
Yeah, it sure is. Slovis, again, projected to go top 5 next year. Moving to number 3, D'Eriq King. This guy was a superstar at Houston. He did a little bit of everything for him. In 2017, he was the 3rd leading receiver and the 3rd leading rusher while being the leading passer at Houston in 2017. Just think about that for a second.
He's an athlete, man. There's nothing really else you can say about it. The guy does what is asked of him, and he does it at a high level.
Yeah, and then the next year he went full-time at quarterback. 50-plus touchdowns, 3,500 yards in 2018. It really went under the radar of how good he was with his legs, with his arm. He did a lot of everything. 2019, he only played in 4 games. Had 12 touchdowns in those 4 games. He carried the Houston team. I believe they were 1-3 before he decided to opt out and transfer, which I think was best for him to do for his future.
Yeah, I think D'Eriq, he transferred not only to, help his draft stock, but he also transferred to a place where he felt like he could win and do it at a higher level and have more of a chance to compete, for a college football championship. And Miami very well can do that this year, especially with him being at the helm. The only thing that he's got to come back from is his ACL injury. But if he can do that, Rhett Lashley, another guy, not quite up there in the tier with Lane Kiffin, but a guy well respected among, college football coaches as an offensive guru and a quarterback whisperer. And I think year 2 under Miami, especially with some of the weapons that they've brought in, a guy, Charleston Rambo, Mike Harley coming back, he's got the weapons to really excel NFL this year.
Yeah, for sure. He's tough to contain. He's slippery in the pocket. I know they're getting blasted against Clemson when he broke off a 40 to 60-yard run, something of that nature. And he was really good last year. 23 touchdowns, only 5 picks, and he flat out, carry this offense. Watch the NC State game. I believe he had like 80 or 90% of the yards that day.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think that this Miami offense, they just need more consistency. And, of course, it'll start with King. But, once everything else comes full circle, I think King's going to play much better, too, while everything else around him develops.
Yeah, I think that was one of the bigger issues with the Miami offense last year was De'Aaron King. He didn't get as much help as you'd like to see from your team, and the offensive line struggled this year. It's looking to be a lot different, a lot better than it was last year. Obviously, a different scheme, but with the wide receiving as well. The receivers were just very inconsistent, and this year they're looking to get a little bit more consistency out of it. So I think if the offensive line and the receiving group shores their issues up, then the sky's the limit for him. As far as the college football season goes.
In terms of an NFL draft prospect, he's 5'11", 202, a little undersized. He throws with his upper body rather.
Yeah.
He needs to improve with using his lower body. That'll lead to more velocity, and that will lead to better throws. The decision making is there though. Over the last couple of years, as a starter, he's not thrown many interceptions, many turnovers at all, really. So that's one thing that really stands out about him.
I think, De'Aaron will be respected as a high-level college football quarterback. I don't know if he'll, I would love to see him succeed in the NFL and get a chance to, shine. But look at a lot of teams will look at Kyler Murray and look at how he's done and maybe see De'Aaron King as see Kyler Murray as his player comp. And, De'Aaron can be a decent draft pick, but I don't see him, being a pro-level starter.
Yeah, a bit of a reach in terms of a Kyler Murray comparison, but, I still think you could see him potentially convert to running back and have success for sure. Moving to number 2, Spencer Rattler. A lot of people still, after his one season, call this guy overhyped, all this and that, because he's projected, he's the Heisman favorite. He's projected to go number 1 next year. But that's not what I see when I watch him on film. This guy's arm strength stands out. He has great mobility. For only starting one season, I don't think he's overhyped whatsoever. I think he's a young guy who really builded off his struggles last year. He's going to carry that into next season.
Yeah, I think that's where all the overrated and overhyped comments come from is the issues that he had within like the first 2 or 3 or 4 games of the season. But you look at the stats and, 67.5% completion rating on top of 3,000 yards and 28 tuds. It's a really impressive stat line for a shortened season in a Big 12. He showed no lack of, talent. And we saw that against, one of Big 12's best offense or defenses last year in Oklahoma State, where he just absolutely tore them in half.
The thing that really stands out about Rattler is his first start was against an FCS school, looked great. The next week, 3 picks, 4 touchdowns, and a loss to Kansas State. The next week, again, they lost with another 2 picks. He had 5 interceptions in his first 4 games, and then he only had 2 over the next 7 games. He learned to control his arm talent. He, figured out what the offense was asking from him in Lincoln Riley, and he was making plays. And that's something, for him to do that in such a short time, from all these turnovers and losing games, completely flipping the script for the end of the year and carrying the hype in. That's what really stands out to me about Spencer Rattler. Yeah,
Rattler he's a guy that, a lot of people like or dislike. I feel like there's really no in between because of his social media presence. He had a whole, he was featured on QB1, a show features high school athletes, quarterbacks specifically. And, people may think that, he's cocky and, he's got an ego. And I think it's just confidence. I think. Yeah, he showed he got humbled in the first few games of the season. I would say he was humbled, and now you see that he knows that he can be that guy for Oklahoma, and he just kind of had to, go through the struggles of being the guy at Oklahoma.
I think that was probably what was best for him, truthfully. Coming out big shot recruit, you finally get your shot. The keys are handed to you. You play not very well in your first few games. I think that's where really sometimes, battling adversity really turns these guys up, and Rattler certainly did. I think people need to stop overlooking that because that certainly stands out.
I agree with you 100% there.
And with Oklahoma returning one of the nation's top receiving corps, he is rightfully so a Heisman favorite. So I would like to say that his number 2 ranking is completely deserve it. People may disagree, but I think he's truthfully one of the top 3 to 5 quarterbacks in the country for sure.
I'm right there with you.
Moving to number 1, it kind of was a tough toss up at number one, Howell and Rattler. We didn't really have much of disagreement. Either one we'd have agreed with.
Right.
Howell, this guy, phenomenal first 2 seasons, 30K plus yards, 30 plus touchdowns in each of his first 2 years. What really stands out to you about Howell that you really like?
The arm talent, it's phenomenal. Dating back to just his freshman year. The guy embraces the moment.
First game of his freshman year, really.
Yeah. I mean, the guy is. You said it right here. Phenomenal. I mean, you can't say anything less about Sam Howell that you can't insult him. His play it speaks for itself. His arm talent, it's through the roof. And I think that like you said, we could have went with Sam or Spencer here, but I think you just got to look at Sam, and he's a true undisputed number one quarterback in the country this year.
He most certainly, fits this offense, the spread RPO style. He also throws a great deep ball. So these guys, his play action fake is great. And with how good they've been able to run the ball, it's just been a match made in heaven, really, for North Carolina. He has 8+ footwork that also stands out. I think a Baker Mayfield comparison in terms of talent and the toughness, I think that's on par. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think, and even in terms of, mobility, they know when to get out of the pocket. They're not going to be a guy that's going to run, a 4.5 or anything, or, in terms of 40, but they're going to they have the speed they have that sneaky athleticism that's going to get first downs or get the tough yardage.
Yeah, most certainly. Each phrase a great touch, anticipation on breaking routes. He's a little inconsistent. And, one thing that really is my only concern with Howell this year is he's going to be without his top 4 weapons from the past 2 years. His top 2 his top 2 running backs and his top 2 receivers. He's had those guys as disposal the last 2 years. Now he's got to kind of do it himself this year with a lot of young guys. He's got to build that chemistry. So I think it's perfect for him. He's going to, he can declare for the NFL draft after this, and it's a great year to prove himself to scouts and to college football fans really who might question this number 1 ranking.
Yeah. Do you think, say he puts similar stats, as he's had the past 2 years, he doesn't throw, a 50 touchdown season or, have a Joe Burrow-esque season. I feel like that's what some people are, hyping up. I just kind of see him as, as if, not a Trevor Lawrence comparison, but, doing what Trevor Lawrence did, not getting crazy numbers, but doing enough to, help the team succeed and obviously do it at a high level.
Yeah, again, he fits the offense. That's really where his numbers come from. His numbers are kind of congruent on what his running backs do, So people, if he has a little less numbers this year as a Heisman favorite, people are going to go overrated this and that. And I don't think that's going to be the case whatsoever because it's not all him with how the system is built.
Right.
With that being said, I think that wraps up our top 10. Do you have anything else that you would like to add about either of these 10 guys or the honorable mentions list?
I think that there was a lot of people that, can easily put some of the honorable mention guys in the list. And, for viewers, I'd love to hear your content or your guys, input on that. Cause guy Miles Brennan is a guy that could have even, went in the top 5. I think his injury, I don't know if we really talked about, Brennan and LSU, but I think Brennan is, if he gets back from his injury, fine. I think LSU's offense will be really good this year.
Yeah, I believe he averaged over 300 passing yards per game before he went down. Another guy really stood out, freshman Grayson McCall. He did everything kind of like Ritter did with his arm, with his legs. He really stood out as well. Dustin Crum from Kent State. I've really been impressed with him. Kent State actually led the nation in scoring offense last year over Alabama. Granted, they only played 4 games, but they were still scoring at a higher rate due to him and his arm. So yeah, that's something I'd like to point out. With that being said, I think that's going to wrap everything up. Rowdy, appreciate you having you back on.
Absolutely, man.
This was fun, and hopefully these guys can come out and prove us right this season. Maybe some guys can prove us wrong. They'll potentially be on this list next year for sure.
Oh, yeah, definitely some guys that we're going to all have our eyes on.
Yes, sir. All right, man. Take it easy.
Absolutely. You too, brother.